We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Burn Power, your host, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia on a wonderfully gray, overcast day. I say wonderfully gray because I know what's coming, summer, and it's going to be hot, and I'll take every cool, drippy day I can get. I'm coming from Alaska. I lived 22 years in Alaska before spending the last 3 or so years here, and I miss the misty, dark, cloudy days. And maybe you're one of those sun people. Enjoy it. I enjoy those other days, which fill so many people's lives with depression. I don't get depressed. I just saw some drips off the trees, which are full of leaves now. And I am coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia, as I said, and things have been interesting here. There's been a lot of, what shall we say? We'll just say that what's happening just up north from us and a bit to the west has had a bit of an effect here. But I'm not going to talk about that today. Some of you are probably expecting a little bit more than what I'm going to give you today. Don't worry. A little bit more is coming. I've actually, the reason I'm doing this kind of just talkathon today is because I am working on some stuff, and I've gotten so caught up in editing that, it's turning out great. But it's also slow. To do a really good job of editing, for me, takes a while, and I kind of got trapped in this new video I'm doing called 10 Great Obscure Songs. And you're going to love it, and you're not going to know the music. And that's the point, is that I think people get on this one track, whatever that track is. Sometimes it's the big track. It's like everybody knows certain names, but these are the names that people don't know. And I'm interested to share those because I find those, sometimes what is hidden is more interesting than what we all know. I mean, do I ever need to hear Hotel California again? No, not really. I mean, I will, but I don't need to. Whereas you do need to hear Sleep, Sweet Countrymen by Reverend Glasseye and His Wooden Leg. Just saying. The other thing is, there is that other... part of it is I've just had so many new ideas, and it's hard to know where to throw them all. So I've been kind of like rearranging. It's like suddenly it's like my brain is popping. I don't know, maybe it's the impending apocalypse and want to get it all in before we say farewell. I'm joking. I don't think there's an apocalypse like that coming in the near future, but you never know. If I'm wrong, who's going to correct me? So, but of course there is 2020, How We Got Here, number 13, which is circling. And as I've said before, part of my problem is the situation is changing so much. I hate not having to use the word fluid anymore. It was a really good word. The situation is fluid. But some other people have colonized that word, and fluid now is something else. But I'm joking. I'll use any word I feel like using. But I think one of the things I have been noticing, and maybe you've noticed it too, and if you have, let me know in the comments. Oh, by the way, before we get too far, just a reminder, I don't make a dime off of YouTube for doing these videos. They take too much of my time, and I need to do other things, but I do need extra funding, and if you feel like contributing to the cause, go down and use the PayPal link below. Of course, if you don't have any money, or if you're just coming through, or if you're one of my old subscribers, thanks so much to all of you, and I'm serious. Without you, I don't know if I'd be doing this as long, that's for sure. But you can always do the hit like thing, which tells the algorithmic God something. It's like, I just found out I had my first shadow banned video Now, it's been up for a couple of years, actually. But I tried searching it. It's the Labrie lecture called Conceptual Humanity. It's very clearly Burn Power, Labrie lecture, Conceptual Humanity. But if you type in the words Conceptual Humanity with quotes on it, which should get you straight there, nope, not even on the page. Nowhere. And then if you put Burn Power, Conceptual Humanity, maybe way down. But if you put Burn Power, Conceptual Humanity might do it. But you have to type in an awful lot to find it. And I think the reason for that is they figured out what it was about. Not only do I question trans ideology there, but I question a good chunk of this whole, I just want to be myself. I just want to be me. I need to discover who I am. And maybe who I am involves robots or dolls or, changing my haircut. and so because it's such a deep dive in a sense that, and it's kind of, a lot of people have been scared of that video for good reason, because I didn't, the trans ideology is right near the beginning. Where I go from there gets really scary. And so because I think that there are possibilities in this world that we will not stop at simply changing our gender, but we will change as much of our biology as possible. And we will do it through machines. We will do it through cosmetic surgery. We will do it through body modification. We will do it any way we can, because people no longer feel that they are made in the image of God. They're just self-defined. What a nightmare. Anyway, too long about that, but give that video some love. And if you haven't hit a like on it, hit a like on it, and let the algorithmic gods know this is a good video, because it is. It's one of the ones I'm proud of. And also there's a question and answer session at the end of that one. And you could tell, as Tom Wolfe once said, you could hear the weenies screaming on the fire. Weenies being, if you're not an American, it's like a hot dog. And screaming is what happens with sausage when it gets really hot. Like, yee! And that's what people were kind of doing in the question session there. Okay, enough of that. But one of the things I have been noticing is that there's been talk for the last year or so, ever since 2020, about the need for a new culture, the need for recreating something new. And I've had people on my site here say, Bern, you've thought a lot about culture. What do you think? And of course, I have been getting to this. This isn't off my radar at all. This is my radar. In fact, I would say I'm probably more attuned to all of this stuff than most people realize, which I'm about to demonstrate. But these are just a few preliminary thoughts before we start doing. I really feel like I've got to get 2020, that How We Got Here, number 13, out of my system before I can start the new stuff. And the new stuff will include the tourism stuff, and cute, and creepy, and all these things people have been asking me to do, because this is all culturally relevant. But what I have noticed is that when people start talking about culture, for instance, Tim Pool, whom I respect a good majority of the time, except when he gets on his high horse and starts ranting and getting angry about stuff, I'm like, okay, Tim, I got it. But I respect him, and he says we need a new culture. But then he'll start talking about video games and skateboarding and rock music. Fine, but that's not a new culture. That's the old culture, and the most you want to do with it is, rebrand it a little bit and add some words you like. Make it so that it's more free speech appropriate or something. That's not a new culture. That's not the new culture we need. Sargon of Akkad just put out, recently, yesterday, he came on, Carl Benjamin came on his Sargon channel and did a talk about aesthetics and how he's been interested in aesthetics. And I was like, yes! And then he went off and started talking about video games. And I was just like, okay, I get it. But that's not the kind of aesthetic change we need. I mean, if you live in a city, look at the newest architecture. That'll tell you the kind of aesthetic change we need. That's really serious stuff. And it's not going to change just like Oh, we got new video games. New video games fits in the new architecture, no matter what you do. And obviously, this is something, if you've spent any time on this channel, if this is not your first video, you know that I spend a good chunk of time talking about culture, aesthetics, art, music, film, and in my How We Got Here series, a good chunk of that relates to aesthetic, cultural choices, because I think those are crucial. That's also why I put annotated versions of the Hans Ruckmacher lectures on this channel, because that is a crucial piece of my own development. And I think he understood, and he passed that on to me, and I hope to pass it on to you, that this is central to any change, positive change, worthwhile change, meaningful change. I like meaningful better than positive. Positive is like, electrical, positive, negative. Let's get to meaningful, because positive is just too easy to misuse. Change that our society can have. We've taken a serious wrong turn. Part of my question has been, where did the serious wrong turn come from? And there are certain points in our cultural development before the 20th century that I could point to. But even in the 20th century, there are still moments that are very good, and we can learn from those moments. Even within the modernist stream, where things start to really fall off the rails is ex-post hippie. It's after this. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a psychedelic fan, because the psychedelics did notice a change in the world that was inhuman. And the answer was to change it inside your head, to which, look at it differently. I'm sitting here looking, there's a huge postmodern skyscraper out this side of my window, which I'm not going to show you right now. And indeed, you could look at that differently if I was tripping. I could look at it differently. I could see it waving. I could see colors emanating from it. I could see it glowing. Well, it wouldn't change the fact that the stupid, inhuman thing is on that street. And that's what I'm talking about. If you want to experiment with, what's inside your mind and how far the universe goes, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But let me just let you know, any more than sitting on a computer and typing into the social media vacuum or going into the metaverse, how come everyone thinks the metaverse is already something? It isn't. I actually have a video in mind about all the things we think are going to happen, which are just absolute holy grails that we'll never get to. One of them being living in a perfect virtual world, because that requires everyone to stop living in the real world. And that requires either one of two things: a matrix like we become batteries and cease existing just to live in that world, or that world breaks apart on the shores of reality, because in fact, you can't have a whole useless section of your population in dream world and expect that the real physical things continue at all without crushing you. It's like that building. It's going to stay there no matter what pills you're on, no matter what psychedelics you take, no matter what you do to it inside your brain. You can take photos of it all day long and complain on Facebook, but who cares? It doesn't change it. And what I'm talking about is changing the things themselves, because that's what needs to change. So I wanted to do a little bit of bragging today. I know bragging is a sin. And as Hans Ruckmacher says, I know I'm being proud, and pride is a sin, but I accept that. And I accept that I'll be doing a little bit of bragging. But I'm not bragging simply to brag. I am bragging to tell you, to do two things. One, to show you, hey, I've been working on this cultural stuff for quite a while. I mean, these books that are next to me aren't here just as decoration. And I want to talk about these books next to me in just a moment. And two, I want to encourage you, as each of my Anadromous videos says, meanwhile we dig. You got to pick an area and start digging. I picked a whole cultural zone that's pretty big. And fortunately or unfortunately, it appears to me both ways. I have not been married and had a family, which would have seriously curtailed my digging. And I would love to have had, and I still sometimes, in my mind, I think maybe there's someone who will accept this broken down, whatever I am now. But unfortunately, I have this armor of all this extra stuff on me now, which is a bit frightening if you understand that this stuff in here represents what's in here. It's a little tough to dig in there and figure out what's going on. Special announcement. Special announcement. And this relates to all of this. Before we get into the meat of this, today's little foray into just beginning to think about cultural things, Matthias Bergmann, who lives in Germany, southern Germany, has been starting to go around and put together through his estuary contacts. Those of you who know Paul van der Klee know the word estuary, and that's a meeting place between people searching for meaning of different stripes. You could be an atheist, you could be a Christian, you could be a heretic. I'm looking at you, Sam. You could be all sorts of people. But getting together and discussing what's wrong. Exactly what I'm trying to do right now. But trying to find solutions, but also doing questions. Now, Paul does a lot of his estuaryizing over on, what is it? My brain just slipped. Someone's going to fill it in for me. They're typing. Stop typing. I'm going to get it. What is that place? Twitch? Yeah, something like that. So over on Twitch streaming with all this stuff. And, but also there's these little groups. There's a group in Germany who meets together who are kind of in this triangle or quadrangle. I guess I'm in there somewhere between that, John Vervaeke, Jonathan Peugeot, and Paul van der Klee. The little corner of the internet. It's more like the little triangle, or I wouldn't want to call it the devil's triangle, the heavenly triangle. No, the meaning triangle. Whatever. But it's a corner. It's a corner of the internet that has no walls, so anybody can come and look. But anyway, the special announcement is this: Matthias Bergmann has been putting together something for I believe it's August 27th and 28th. In southern Germany, and I'm going to talk to him soon, do an interview, and we will discuss it in more depth there, so then you can actually get excited if you didn't get far enough into the video to listen to this, where he invited me to come and talk. Well, that's exciting, but what's even more exciting is that he invited Paul van der Klee to come, and I just heard that Paul van der Klee's church gave him permission to take this trip. So, me and Paul van der Klee and some other people are going to meet at this kind of retreat center for 2 days, day and a half. Sounds like it will be interesting. I put this in your ear. Take it. And we will talk more about it. Just a little something. Meanwhile, I want to talk to you about some of these books. Now, the first ones, well, first of all, I'm going to come to these last. These are 2 books on ornamentation. What's the big deal with ornamentation, Bern? But I'm just going to take these here in random order. And these are just some of the books that I have been kind of working through lately. Now, a lot of them are visual, which is how I can work with them. Some of them, like this book. This book is by Gordon Craig, or Edward Gordon Craig, who was a theoretician of theater back in the early part of the 20th century and continued on into the early third of the 20th century, we'll say. And this is Gordon Craig on movement and dance. And I'm reading essays here from a magazine he put out during that period. And what he is the intersection between acting, dance, the movement, this is him on movement and dance, and puppetry, and he has a concept called the Uber marionette. This is when people, I'll talk about puppets in a minute, But I was just talking with a friend of mine who is a principal dancer at a local ballet troupe. And I was showing her this, and very fascinating to deal with those issues, because those may sound really abstract and far away to you, but if we're going to think about culture, we're going to need to think about these places where different arts meet, because we will need to go back to certain places, and I think that's not a bad place to go back to, and think about, okay, what if they'd gone that way instead of this way? Another one is the Frighteners. This is actually a Baptist minister in England who is discussing his fascination and other people's fascination with horror films, horror culture. You know, why are people so interested in serial killers? Questions like this. I highly recommend it. Frighteners. It's a good introduction to the subject. For someone like me, it's like old hat. I've also been recently reading R. Crumb's Genesis, and it's illustrated by him. If you know him, he's a very crazy underground artist, almost the definition of underground artist. But in this, he did a straightforward, kind of crazy interpretation of every verse in the book, every chapter, we'll say, in the book of Genesis. And it's just fascinating stuff. It's all comic books, but these are not like your friendly Christian comics, which are usually terribly drawn. And by the way, I want to point out something. All of these book covers that I have on these are only temporary till I get my shelves up, because I don't like book covers. I like the cloth. I like having, this cloth texture with various embossed images on it. To me, that's so much better. It creates, I'm throwing them on a couch, by the way. It creates just much more of a, what can I say? It creates a more textural. It gives us more deep, rich textures. If your wall is just filled with paperback books, it looks about as sterile as a blank wall. It just has these shiny colors and stuff, and it's not really interesting. But now and then you get these books with the case laminate covering, and they're not bad. This is interesting. This is a book on Georgian street art, which in my thinking is more connected with the history of Georgian art than is anything postmodern that they have picked up since independence in 1990. And I would stick by that. This is a really great book on the art of San Francisco posters in the 1960s. I have a lot of criticisms of the hippie movement. Their poster art was not one of them. Then, people often tell me that, what's with the puppets, Bern? I've had some comments here, particularly when I made the Jonathan Peugeot interview video, which was originally supposed to be on his channel, which is why I'm talking too much at the beginning, because I thought I was being interviewed, and I was. And we weren't discussing the situation in Ukraine, because he doesn't want to. So he kind of clammed up on that, but I couldn't stop talking, so sue me. But a lot of people will say, and I've seen it even in my comment section, and it's like, you're stupid for being interested in puppets. And I just am like, so funny. It's just like, you think puppets are Muppets. I think they look like this. Is that really a cute image to you? Is that like a friendly, child-friendly image to you? Amazing book called Czech Puppet, the Czech Puppet, Česká Loďka. And amazing stuff. Here, I just got this. I saw it originally while I was in Prague. Super heavy book. I ended up ordering it later, and I highly recommend the book. Amazing photography of Czech puppets. And that's the kind of thing that gets my juices flowing, because it's so interesting. And the puppet is in reality. Puppets and dance, the reason I'm interested in both of those things is they happen in the physical. You can watch a video of it, but it ain't the same at all. This is a book I've been reading lately, and this is a book on Georgian vocabulary, ethnographical vocabulary of Georgian material culture. And I like the word material there. And then it goes through and it has lists of things that are ethnographic items, from clothing to bits and pieces of stuff. winemaking ingredients and all of this, and headpieces, all of this, and it gives me the name. Well, it tells me sometimes this just says headband in English. I wish it was in Georgian, but this says tav sabore, which tells me, tav sabore is a certain kind of a... Okay, great. A lot of it's most of the Georgian words in English. Oh, this is heavy. Georgian Baroque. Sorry, it's not Georgian Baroque art, although it's Georgian if you're in England, maybe. But this is Baroque art, and this is a massive book. I don't have one big, massive book. It is kind of thick, you see, on Georgian art. Sorry, I keep saying Georgian. I live in Georgia. But on Baroque art. And the Baroque culture is extremely important to me because I think this is one of the places where Western culture made a serious wrong turn into the Enlightenment. But that isn't to say I hate the Enlightenment, but it is to say that there are some things we need to go back to in the Baroque era to understand things. Also, the Symbolist era is another very fascinating era, and I am very fascinated with learning more about it. So I've got a variety, of books on symbolism and other forms of similar type art from the late 19th, early 20th century here. But I've got tons more back in Alaska. And the reason I'm getting all of these is because I'm thinking about these subjects. I might as well get new books that I don't have back in Alaska because I want to present you with some material. And hopefully when I get all of these together, it'll make a wonderful library. And wouldn't this be a great thing to have in your library? A history of the poster, which goes with, of course, my interest in the San Francisco posters. But I'm also interested in Soviet-era posters, these constructivist posters. I'm interested in expressionist posters, symbolist posters, Art Nouveau, which is an aspect of symbolism. But then I get books like this. This is a very scary book. Back in the Baroque era, also in Europe, in the Catholic countries, they would often, people would look for saints and relics to put around, and they would get these bones, evidently in Rome, as according to this book, they were excavating bones out of catacombs. And so what they did was then they would identify them as saints. Sometimes they weren't saints, but nevertheless, they would ship them off to places in Germany that were trying to retain their Catholic culture in the face of the evil Protestants. I am one, so I can say that. But this is all about the ornamentation that they would put around these. This is fascinating stuff. I have another book on the same subject by the same guy. But when you look at these things, and some people would say, well, Bern, that's creepy. To which I would say, yeah. Dictionary of Surrealism. By the way, I highly recommend this concise encyclopedia of Surrealism. There's one for Romanticism, Expressionism, Impressionism, Surrealism, and Symbolism. There are 5 of them. They're all great. They're the kind of reading you can just sit there and they have great introductory essays, and then they talk about the most important figures, not only from art, but from music and literature, poetry, drama. It's really fascinating, and I highly, if you want to get into any period, these books are a great way to do it. I have all of them, but I happen to get a second copy of this one. Don't ask. Just found there's a series of 3 books, Euro-Gothic. There's one American Gothic, which unfortunately has a picture of Dracula on the front, who is a Euro-Gothic image, but they were a little confused. There was an English author, Jonathan Rigby, isn't that an English name, who wrote this. And so Euro-Gothic is essentially Gothic. But American Gothic, to me, is a very different thing. And when Americans do most of the vampire stuff and the werewolf, Frankenstein, that's all Euro-Gothic, even if it's made in America. But he didn't see it that way. We disagree. Again, sue me. One of the most fascinating books I've picked up in the last year. Wildermann, The Wild Man, subtitled The Image of the Savage. And this is mostly just photos. There is an introductory essay, which I recommend. But if you've ever seen videos travel, like Rick Steves did a travel video in Austria in the winter once, and all these strange creatures come to take part in the Christmas celebrations. And they're weird images of people in costumes. That this is in the borderland between masks and puppets, this strange world. Well, anyway, it's nothing but strange images of strange costumes, because pretty much every European culture has some image of these kind of ancient, savage, pagan images. And interestingly enough, the one most people are familiar with in America is Krampus, because they made a horror film out of it. But Krampus is like this demon, this really crazy creature, and I think his day is right around St. Nicholas Day, which in Europe is not Christmas, but is I think around the 6th of December. But you have this whole thing of St. Nicholas fighting the demons, which I think is a fascinating image. And I was once in Austria on the 6th, and suddenly this weird stuff was breaking out on the streets in Salzburg. A book about the brothers Quay and their animated puppet films, amazing stuff. I could go on and on about the Quay brothers, and I've done so in other places. Speaking of puppet stuff and related, this is a fascinating book. This is one of the most interesting books I've read in the last year. A guy named Giorgio Agamben from Italy wrote this book on Pulcinella. The Pulcinella is a figure from the Commedia dell'arte theatrical tradition, one of these stock characters. And his philosophical implications of this are just fascinating. For instance, he points out there is one philosophical tradition that says if you pull the mask, Pulcinella always wears a strange mask, and if you pull the mask off, there is no face. And he often has a hunchback, wears a weird conical cap. Eventually, he becomes a puppet and becomes Punch in England, which is I ought to do an entire subject. And finally, I think being in Georgia has made me much more aware of the fact that I'm an American, which I've always been aware of. And then there's this book, The Western, which is put out as part of the Overlook series. And the Overlook series was done mostly in the late 80s and early 90s. For my money, the best encyclopedias of movies in different genres. Their horror one, which ends about 1993 or so, still has never been topped. And anyone says, yeah, but what about all the films that came out after that? And I'm like, who cares? Yeah, maybe they'll make another one someday. But if you want to know about the history, this is the place to go. And so, The Western. Yeah, nice black cover. Okay, so why am I doing that? Well, I want to get to something else here. I just want to mention ornamentation. And there are two books that I have that deal with the subject. One, Owen Jones, The Grammar of Ornamentation. And two, The World Ornament Source Book by Auguste Rassenat. Let's get into these in a little more detail. So this is Owen Jones' 1856 book, The Grammar of Ornament. And it was made during the first period in which you could really make full-color lithographs. And I suppose at the time this would have been a very expensive book. It is not cheap these days, but you can pick it up for over $100. Under $100. And the first thing I'd like to show you is this is our cover of the book. And this is pretty much a copy of the original book. But this tells you something about the world we're living in, and that it's a cheapened version. We're so interested with communicating this information to people that we don't realize that this is the way the book is supposed to look. That is to say, and even this is a bit of a modified version of whatever the original cover was. I don't have a picture of it. Would have been much better. And given that the subject was ornamentation, this is crucial. That is what we're talking about. The ornamentation on buildings, the ornamentation on cultural products, jewelry, clothing, all sorts of things. So essentially what he does is he's going through different periods of time So he talks about the ornamentation of savage tribes, Egyptian ornamentation, Assyrian ornamentation, Greek, goes on through Roman, Arabian, Turkish, Persian, Indian, Hindu, Chinese, Celtic, medieval, and since this book only goes up to 1856, Elizabethan, and he doesn't really get into too much into contemporary ornamentation during that time. But the point that is made very clearly in this book is this: every culture had some form of ornamentation, the little filigree, the little designs that would occupy the corners and edges of life. And this is a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. And there's one other that's very similar to it. And I will be discussing these books and ornamentation much more in detail in the future I will have a video on ornamentation, the necessity of it and the loss of it, and maybe what we can do to get some of it back. Let's check something out. I have a theory. I don't remember what's on the back, but I suspect, okay, it's just black. I was wondering if it was ornamentation. The second book is by Racinet, a French writer. What is it, Auguste Racinet? Yes, Auguste Racinet. And let's see if they've done this. No, they've made that a pretty bland inside cover. A great book has a great... see, I don't look at this as the cover of the book. And this is one reason I don't like paperbacks either. I look at this as the cover of the book. It's rich, deep texture, cloth texture, which is why I hate some of the modern styles of lamination. Case laminate books are my bane because they're just so ugly. But again, Racinet does something very similar. It's a little bit later. He may have seen the Owen Jones book, but now he's got big sections on Japanese art, Persian art, and on through 1888, which was the Art Nouveau period. But he just goes up to the early 19th century. You know, here's one: continuous plant motifs, wallpaper, and fabrics. So again, he makes the exact same point with, again, beautiful, again, the art of lithography had improved by this point, and so these are even more beautiful illustrations. And Racinet also did a classic book on the fashions of the world at that time, which is also highly beautiful and elegant. But you can see here what he's done is he's really given you much more detail, and he's showing you images that are, again, he's just simply making the point that every culture has beautiful ornamentation. And I would say at this point, every culture but one. Ours. Ours, no matter where you are, if you're looking at a cell phone, you don't have probably much ornamentation in your life. You just have dead surfaces. Why is it that our culture has no ornamentation? Well, the history of this kind of goes back to about 1910. There was a man named Adolf Loos, L-O-O-S, who gave a lecture about ornamentation, and he felt that ornamentation should not be on any useful item. Useful items include buildings, includes tableware, cutlery, bowls. Everything he felt should be stripped of this. Now, I could kind of understand it from his perspective because he was looking at the excesses of ornamentation in, say, the Victorian or bourgeois European era, the late 19th century, early 20th century. Although this was also the period of Art Nouveau, which is some of the most beautiful ornamentation I think that has ever been seen. And his lecture Eventually, I believe he wrote the essay Ornament and Crime, and he considered ornamentation a crime, an aesthetic crime. And it also, he points out, that it relates to wealth. You have to have wealth to have ornamentation, which I don't believe is true at all. But it wasn't until 1929 that his work actually was known to a larger public in Germany. He probably got upset by some of the things he saw. But during that period, there was also Art Deco. And the beginnings of Bauhaus had already come. But what's interesting is he influenced Bauhaus with his condemnation of useful ornamentation. After World War II, the International School of Architecture, Danish modern furniture, which is why so much IKEA furniture is bad. It's the Scandinavian modern stuff. Some of the designs are quite interesting, and you may like this very simplistic design but the problem is it's created a world of dead textures. And as I pointed out in my lecture on texture, there's something about texture that feeds us like a nutrition. Nobody could live in a room that had the texture of a white refrigerator. And they would do something to you, and in my lecture on texture, I talk about what would happen. And what happens essentially is the world we live in, where the only thing then of value in so many people's homes, they'll leave their walls like dead space white, imitating art galleries, interestingly enough. And then they'll watch a screen, because the screen is the only thing interesting. But interestingly enough, neither the computer nor the television screen, nor the smartphone are at all conducive to anything related to ornamentation. And it is my opinion that ornamentation is something that feeds us just as much as texture does. It is our embellishment of natural materials. And it has been done by every society. They will all come up with something, to even Eskimo societies have little designs they make that relate to their world. African societies, they don't wear blank clothing. They wear clothing with images scrawled on it, ornamentation scrawled on it. And yet to live in a world without ornamentation, which is the world we live in, where now we have to put photographs and words on t-shirts. Now we are strangely fixated on big-eyed, cute creatures. And so what I'm trying to say by pointing all of these things out in these books, by talking just a little bit of introductory thought about ornamentation, is if we want to change culture, it's not a question of changing the content of the medium, because we have lost a lot more than simply the content of television or the content of a video game or kids not going outdoors and skateboarding or something like that. That is super simplistic. Fixing those things will change nothing. We have to find out a way to touch the real again, to touch texture. That's why I emphasize arts like dance and puppetry, but also actual painting, printed books, your little home collections, getting away from putting all of our stuff in the hands of the cloud. Oh, I hate that. If you think most of what you have is in the cloud, you own absolutely nothing, and you will be happy, according to the blurb put out by the same people who want to reset you. Well, I think the reset ought to be completely different. Everyone thinks we're moving into this world where the AI will take over and all of this. And as the recent war in Ukraine points out, the real world, the physical world, reality will always take its revenge on people so naive as to think that the reality is found on screens. Don't get me wrong. I've got plenty more movies than you do on screens, on DVDs. But also, they're on DVDs and Blu-rays. They are in a place where if the system goes down, they'll still be useful. They'll still be meaningful. And I appreciate a well-designed cover. I just recently chose two different designs. Between two different designs, it was a couple dollars more to get this one particular DVD. It wasn't even a Blu-ray. But one had the original artwork from the movie and the other just a picture of the main star. I went with the artwork for the movie. Why? I want more of beauty in my life, which includes more plants in the house. We need these things. It includes thinking about the color of your walls and not just painting it some bland color. Make it interesting. Make your life interesting. I think we have to get beyond. I think Jordan Peterson was absolutely right when he said, go clean up your room. Now, as he has said, you need to introduce elements of beauty now that you've cleaned it up. And that's what I'm suggesting. And, make your house something interesting. Now, my house now has hardly been touched by me. I'm working hard to deal with certain things, and eventually I'll show you what I'm doing. But I had a friend over the other day. I hadn't seen my house for a while. And he said, wow, this is such an interesting place to walk into. And like I say, for me, it's not even interesting yet. It's just, I put some stuff on the walls and whatnot, paintings, objects, some fabric, just because I would do that to cover up any kind of modernistic, postmodern commercial mess that has been left behind by the people who have bequeathed to us the dullest of all worlds. It's like, yes, everything's happening in my head in propaganda, to which I'm going like, I'm sorry, I don't care. I want to see what's happening in the real world. My home, my rules. My rules, this is a place for talking. And eventually, if I could find something to jam people's smartphones, I'd get that in a moment. Just something to jam it in my house. So they come in and they couldn't just like, oh, sorry, I got to look at this. Because I hate that. It's just drives me nuts that they think this little text is more important than a conversation. And that's what we need to think about. And so my challenge to you is as I go into this, maybe you'll think of, something to do with gardening. Maybe you'll think of something to do with, education. Maybe you'll think of something to do with science. What I'm talking about isn't just the aesthetic realm, but it is a whole approach to the world we live in. And that's it. I've been talking too much. Remember, subscribe, like, all that stuff. Think about contributing. Remember, August 27th, 28th, if you're in Europe, something special is happening in southern Germany, and you'll hear more about it very soon. So look for my dialogue with Matthias Bergman on my channel in probably a couple weeks. But meanwhile, things to think about. Well, this is Bern from Tbilisi saying thank you so much for spending time with me and letting me brag about some of my books. My bragging is to encourage you to specialize in some areas, and you can't do it by living on the internet, period. If I've said this before, if you want to study something and your first source is Wikipedia, fine. If your last source is Wikipedia, your final source, you're an idiot. It's that simple. You have to graduate. At least go down to the bibliography and check out what books you should be looking for. As I've learned, exploring things is endlessly fascinating. And if your life is dull, it's probably because you're not exploring anything. Start exploring. Meanwhile, we dig. So anyway, remember, Anadromous, the fish, the salmon, swimming against the stream, trying to get home to spawn, while all the bears and eagles are out to pull you apart along the way. Happy fighting, happy digging, happy swimming.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.